I'll never forget the morning I got the address notification on my phone. I was standing at the window of our house, sipping coffee from my favorite mug with the Best Dad logo on it, even though I wasn't officially one yet. Outside the window, through the grayish Chicago dawn, cars pulled by, buses snorted, passers-by flashed by. All of this everyday hustle and bustle made me feel calmer. But inside, I could feel the tension. I had no idea what I would find in the message, even though I had set the whole thing in motion. Opening the message, I read, Room 314, Lakeview Hotel, 7:00 a.m. She'll be there. My heart thumped loudly, and my hand with the mug trembled. I set the coffee on the windowsill so abruptly that a drop splashed outside. Jason, honey, is everything okay? Miranda's voice came from the hallway. I turned around, trying to hide my panic. She came out into the hallway in a soft house robe, her hair a little disheveled, but her eyes were curious and concerned. Yeah, everything's fine. I smiled, kissing her cheek. Just work, I added, trying to sound more confident. Should I tell her the truth? That I'd set up this crazy test, hired the man who was supposed to seduce her, and now I'd been texted the address where they'd end up together? No, that would ruin my plan, because it was supposed to look natural. We ate breakfast in silence, and I could see Miranda glancing at me worriedly. Usually I talked about everything, about clients, about advertising and consulting. But that day I didn't. The only thought pounding in my ears was, I want to get to the bottom of this. I hastily kissed her goodbye and headed for the car. The gray sedan already knew the way to the office by heart, but instead of turning toward the skyscraper where I work, I headed toward that ill-fated Lakeview. No one at the reception desk was surprised to see a man in a business suit who, without a moment's hesitation, got on the elevator and went up to the 3rd floor. I walked down the hallway, the carpet springing softly under my feet. Room 314 was at the very end. My heart was pounding like I was running a marathon. And then I remembered why I'd started this whole thing. Stupid jealousy. Fear of losing my trust. I thought Miranda had fallen out of love with me. I was drifting away from her, working nights, trying to advance my career. We saw each other briefly at breakfast, sometimes a few words at dinner. And on weekends I stayed home more often, exhausted. One day, drunk after a corporate party, I told my buddy that I wanted to test Miranda as if she no longer had feelings for me. He, laughing, proposed the idea. And hire a man. Let him test her strength. If she resists, then she loves you. If not, at least you'll know the truth. That's how I got in touch with Zach, through people I knew. I had the money. Zach's a charismatic guy, fitness trainer, knows how to impress. Seduce my wife. I didn't believe she'd go for it at the time, but I wanted to confirm my confidence, or my paranoia. Door 314 was ajar. I didn't hear any sounds, but I guessed I could catch a glimpse. The fool. He'd gone to look at his own trap himself. I stepped inside. A hallway was empty, the smell of cheap air freshener hitting my nose. There was a light on in the room. The first thing I saw were clothes thrown on a chair. A woman's blouse, pants, a man's shirt. My throat clenched. I froze. Then I heard muffled moans. I wanted to leave, but my legs felt woozy. I took a couple steps toward the bedroom door. It was open. And then I saw them. Silhouettes on the crumpled sheets. Zach was cradling her, holding her by the hips. Miranda. Oh my God, my wife. She arched up, as if caught in a wave of pleasure. I saw her face. Closed eyes, bitten lip. I didn't scream, I didn't fight. I just hooked my fingers into the door jamb and watched myself gasp. He whispered something in her ear, and she moaned softly in response. My thoughts roared. I'm the one who hired him. I'm the one who set the trap for her. But now, seeing her happy, liberated expression, I felt the ground go from under my feet. I don't know how long I stood like that. Maybe a second, maybe a minute. Finally, Zach looked up and saw me. The expression in his eyes was an odd mixture of horror and guilt. Miranda threw her head back, saw me, gasped, and rolled off the bed, clutching at the sheet to cover her nakedness. "Jason, what are you?" she whispered, her eyes widening, her breathing hitching. Zach swore and retreated to the foot of the bed, trying to pick up his clothes, or at least hide behind them. "Miranda," I muttered, feeling everything inside tearing up. I don't know. My voice shook. I wasn't prepared for this reality, even though I'd created it myself. I just didn't think I'd see it like this. "Jason, it's not what you think," she started to say frantically, then realized the absurdity of the phrase. No. She stopped talking, realizing it was impossible to get out of it. I felt like I was going to explode with rage. But instead of screaming, I ran out of the room like I was on fire. I ran out into the corridor. My feet carried me to the stairs. My heart was pounding, sweat pouring into my eyes. I rushed out into the street, almost hitting the receptionist, who shouted something in my wake. The streets of Chicago, the noise of the cars, the passers-by doing their morning jogs had all blended into a hum. I ran to the car, scraps of thoughts swirling in my head. Why did I do it? Why did she give up? Does she? She doesn't love me anymore. Opening the door, I sank down into the driver's seat and covered my face with my hands. I wanted to scream, but there was only horror and pain inside. And yes, guilt. I'd set her up. But she could have said no. She could have said no, kicked him out of her life. Instead, I started the engine and drove off, not even realizing that I was going home. When I got there, the house was quiet. Miranda didn't arrive until close to lunchtime. I sat in the living room, staring at one point, trying to think of what to say. She came in hesitantly, stopping at the door. "Jason, listen to me." Her voice was quiet, a little broken. I looked at her. Her hair was still damp from her shower, obviously showered to wash off her marks. Her eyes red. Had she been awake? Had she been crying? "What can I say, Miranda? How did it come out?" I spoke slowly, each word as if forced through my teeth. She took a step toward me. I didn't plan it. It all just kind of happened so fast. Zach. He became interested in my life. We crossed paths at the cafe near the school. He knew how to treat me right, how to praise me, how to support me. I was tired, lonely. You're always at work." I didn't realize how. She put her hands over her face, sighed heavily. "It's my fault." I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight. I sat there with my fists clenched. I was the one who'd whispered to Zach where she worked, where she ate lunch. I knew it was all a setup, but it killed me how quickly she'd gone along with it. "Do you love him?" I asked, not taking my eyes off him. "I don't know. I'm confused." She shook her head, then said quietly, "I just felt like I was nothing to you. He made me feel wanted. I don't know what hurt more, her confession or my realization of my own stupidity." I got up, walked around the room. The walls were crushing. The pictures on the shelf smiles. A wedding, traveling. It was all falling apart. "Miranda, I can't right now. I can't talk to you right now. Go away, please." She wanted to say something, but she saw the look in my eyes and realized it was better not to argue. She bowed her head and walked out. The door closed softly. I was left alone, in complete silence. The pounding of my own heart echoed in my temples. "What have you done? She cheated on you, but you pushed her into it." And so began my longest day. But that wasn't the end of the story, because by the evening, a plan for revenge was brewing in my head. And not just Zach. I blamed Miranda as much as I blamed myself. Yes, I'd set up the test, but she'd broken our vows. I couldn't have imagined it would go this far. I justified myself to myself as I walked into the dark living room. My gaze fell on the phone lying on the table. The screaming in my head demanded that I call Zach, and tell him everything. But I knew that sooner or later we'd have to face each other. And then I'd get even. Miranda didn't come home that night, so I didn't call her. I lay in our bed, feeling the bed suddenly become a vast, icy wasteland. I couldn't sleep. The image of her face contorted with passion, and Zach's hands sliding around her waist flashed before my eyes. I angrily threw back the sheet, stood up, and threw on my robe. I walked to the window and opened it, letting in the cool Chicago air. The city was awake, sirens blaring, cars honking. I stood at the window, imagining her right now, maybe with him, or maybe she was crying at some friend's house. By morning I still hadn't slept a wink. The next day I went to work, but work was out of the question. I was shaking with rage. Colleagues came up to me and asked me how I was feeling, but I just waved them off. At lunchtime I realized that I couldn't take it anymore. I took the day off under the pretense of a family emergency and drove to Zach's. I knew where he rented his apartment. I'd checked his profile before I hired him. I caught him at the gym doing a personal training session with a client. Waiting at the entrance, I saw him professionally explaining, correcting the girl while joking cheerfully. He looked confident and calm, as if nothing had happened. When the client left, I walked in with my fists clenched. "Zach, we need to talk," I hissed, my voice as gray as a wolf's before a spurt. He looked at me without much surprise, frowning. "Look, Jason, I've been meaning to call you. I didn't expect it to turn out like this myself. It went further than." He paused, shaking his head. "I'm sorry, man, I really didn't mean to break up your marriage." The words "didn't mean to" sent me into another fit of anger. I wanted to lash out and hit him, but I couldn't. There were people around, and it wouldn't have solved anything. "You should have just checked, flirted, kissed at most," I hissed. "And you've already jumped into bed with her." He tensed up. "Look, I went along with it because you paid. But no one is immune to the fact that feelings can flare up. And yes, she's cheating on you. But maybe if your relationship had been stronger, we wouldn't have gotten to this point." His words hit me in the solar plexus. I wanted to object, but I realized that this whole situation was beyond what could be written off as a simple order. "Are you, going on?" It came out of my mouth. I don't know, Jason. Honestly, Miranda, she's not an empty doll. We've had time to talk, to get to know each other. And hell, I shouldn't have walked through your family like a minefield." But he bit his lip, like he was about to say something important, but changed his mind. I nodded slowly, a bitter lump in my throat. "I'm warning you, Zach. Stay away from her. Or—" I didn't finish. I thought he wanted to say something, but he held back. I turned around and went outside. The bus exhaust hit me on the sidewalk, and I breathed in the stinky air that now reflected my inner state. That same night, Miranda came home. I was lying on the couch in the living room when I heard her carefully turning the key in the lock, as if afraid I'd jump out at her with a knife. "Jason," she called out. I stood up, turning on the light. Miranda looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her lips tight. "I slept over at my mom's friend's house. I'm sorry if I should have told you," she said quietly. I didn't say anything. She sat down on the edge of the couch. She looked like she wanted to apologize, but didn't know how. "I realize that you won't forgive me. But maybe we could try to talk, see a therapist. I don't know, we have to move on somehow." I slumped down in the chair across from her. "Do you realize that I won't be able to forget that scene?" I asked harshly. "And do you realize that it's worse than just a one-night stand?" She turned pale, looked away. "Yes, I know, but I didn't mean to lie to you," I snapped. "And I don't know what to do." There was silence. My head was a whirlwind of resentment, jealousy, guilt. But in some strange way, I was also strangled by the realization. What if she was already attracted to him? What if there are feelings there? We sat there until nightfall, hardly speaking. Then I went to sleep in our bedroom. She stayed on the couch. Or pretended to. I didn't want to look her in the eye. And in the morning, another wave of pain began. Before I left for work, she stood at the hallway mirror, pale and confused. "Jason, there's something. I have to." She started, but she changed her mind and stopped talking. I waved my hand, not wanting to listen. And I left. A scandal, a real scandal, broke out by the end of the week. I don't remember exactly what the trigger was. Maybe it was someone's careless text message, or my irascible question, "Are you going to see him again?" When we got to the living room, both of our rages exploded at the same time. "This is all my fault," she yelled, backing up against the wall. "Maybe if you weren't so cold, if you weren't disappearing to the office, I wouldn't feel lonely." "Lonely?" I yelled back at her. "I've worked hard for you. I've made money for you. The house, the car, everything for us. And what did you want? A romantic flirtation with some coach?" She waved her hands in despair. "I didn't know he was hired by you," she hissed with tears in her voice. "Do you think I would have? I would have even looked at him if I'd known it was your stupid experiment. How could you, Jason? You hired a lover for me. What a shame." That truth burned me. I was petrified. So if I'd known it was a setup, I wouldn't have gone to bed with him. Yes. So the only thing that matters is that I set it up, not that you betrayed me. We stood across from each other, breathing heavily. She raised her hand to her face, as if she wanted to wipe away her tears. I can't explain it right now. It's horrible, I know. But you were mean to me too. You must have watched me suffer while he and I talked. Flirted. Isn't that low?" The pain lodged in my throat. I took a step toward her, squeezed her shoulders. "Yes, I'm an idiot. I admit it. I wanted to test you. But now I know you're capable of cheating. You ruined our marriage." She pushed me away and cried. I felt the rage rising again. We were yelling at each other, remembering all the hurts of the last few years. Suddenly she screamed, "I might be pregnant. What am I supposed to do now?" There was dead silence in the room. I froze, looking at her like a ghost. She sobbed, straightened up. "Pregnant?" I asked slowly, as if I didn't fully realize. She nodded. "I just took a test last night. I don't know exactly who the baby's from, but I'm guessing it's from him." The world beneath my feet shook. Instead of screaming again, I turned and ran out of the house, slamming the door shut behind me so hard the windows almost flew out. Fear, pain, rage all mixed into one hellish cocktail. At this point, I realized this wasn't just cheating. It was a disaster. I went to a friend's house who sometimes lent me the keys to his bachelor apartment. For days I didn't show up at home, didn't return Miranda's calls. My friend, Steve, could see that something was wrong with me, but he didn't ask about it. He offered me a drink one night and said, "Look, Jay, I know your family's a mess, but if you have a chance to fix it, fix it. If not, make it something you won't regret." Wise words, but I didn't know where to put myself. Memories came to mind. Our wedding with Miranda, she in a white dress, I'm nervous, her hand trembling in mine. The first trip to the mountains together, the two of us on the same bike. And now, another man's pregnancy. On the third day, I gave up and called her. When I heard her voice, I felt my heart clench. She was calm, but her voice sounded tortured. "Jason, I know how it sounds, but the baby could be yours, and we've been close for a while now." Yeah, we were. We had a quiet family night a couple weeks ago that turned intimate, although I felt a little distant even then. "Do you want to keep him?" I asked in a colorless tone. "I do," she answered after a pause. "I've always wanted a child. Yes, I know it's a terrible situation right now, but I can't decide to have an abortion." It was like an electric shock. So she's willing to keep the baby, even if she doesn't know if it's mine or Zach's. I hung up the phone in despair. And that same night, I suddenly thought, She chose him. If this is how it's going to turn out, what difference does it make now? I was filled with anger. I went to Zach's house to get him to talk to me. I found him back at the same gym, but he was there alone, closing out his shift. We sat down on a bench near the showers. The soft light of the lamps, the smell of sweat and sanitizer. I felt sick to my stomach. "Zach, you know she's pregnant, right?" I asked bluntly. He froze, looking at me with a mixture of fear and hope that made me feel even more disgusted. "No, Miranda didn't tell me," he said quietly. "Really pregnant?" I nodded. He lowered his head, holding his breath. "Shit. I don't know what to do. I'm not ready for fatherhood." I grinned. "Exactly. And she's already made up her mind that she's going to have the baby." He looked at me, a twinkle of guilt in his eyes. "Look, Jason, maybe I'm guilty of something, but your plan. You're the one who started this game." I jumped up, barely able to resist the urge to punch him. "Yeah, I started it. But not to deal with a kid, and not for you to actually fall in love with my wife." He shook his head. "I didn't realize how it happened myself. She's a great woman, smart, kind. I didn't do it for the money, or rather, at first, yes, but then. We met a few times, we talked. And it turned into something more." Listening to him, I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. "Something more" sounded like a taunt. I growled. "Don't you dare go out with her again. You've ruined my life enough already." Zach sighed heavily. "If she wants to talk to me herself, I won't be able to ignore it. But I won't run after her." Turning around, I walked away, trying not to turn around. Outside the gym door, I nearly collapsed, feeling the nausea kick in. I was shaking with helplessness. Back at Steve's apartment, I couldn't calm down. I couldn't sleep. Everything was spinning around in my head like a goddamn kaleidoscope. My wife, the baby, a lover, and me, the idiot who'd set a trap for my own wife. The next morning, Miranda found me herself, came to the door, trembling, pale-faced. Steve let her in, looking at me questioningly. "It's up to you." I nodded, and he left the two of us alone. I told Zach not to come looking for me. "I need to deal with you," she whispered. "Jason, I realize you hate me, but I don't know what to do." "You don't? Did it occur to you that I don't know either?" I jumped up. "You're having a baby with a man I hired. This is insane." She sat on the edge of the couch with her head down. I thought, we wanted kids. Yeah, it's wrong, it's horrible, but maybe we should find out who the father is. Take a paternity test. I swallowed. The test could only be done over time, not right away. And I wasn't sure if I wanted the result. If it was my baby, I'd have to decide whether to continue the marriage. If it's Zach's baby, and Miranda still wants to have the baby, it turns my life completely upside down. I remembered my childhood, when my father left us, and I grew up in a single-parent household. When I looked at Miranda, I realized she was scared too. "You know what, Miranda," I said slowly. "Even if it is my child, I'm not sure I can forgive you for this. I don't know how I'm going to live with the memory of you moaning in someone else's arms every night." She clasped her hands together, her eyes filling with tears. "I understand. But I still won't have an abortion." We sat in silence. I wanted to scream, but I didn't have the strength left. I felt some kind of icy emptiness inside. Revenge. The thoughts pounded in my head. Revenge on both of them. After a week, I returned home because I couldn't stay at my friend's house indefinitely. Miranda offered to move into another room until we could figure out if we should be together. But something in me was already breaking. Late one night, a wild idea came to me. What if we destroyed their future? For real? I remembered that Zach has a part-time modeling job. He has a reputation as a bon vivant athlete. If I could nail him to the wall, make it look like he'd become a pariah at the athletic club. And Miranda, she could be disrespected at school. Let everyone know she's an unfaithful wife. I caught myself sitting in the dark, gloating over the plans in my head. In the back of my mind, though, I could hear the caustic whisper of conscience. "But it's your own fault, Jason." I silenced that voice. The next day, I went to see a reporter I knew who wrote stories for a local news site. I skillfully pitched him a gossip story about a young fitness trainer who was having affairs with married female clients and luring them into dubious schemes. I didn't name names, but I pointed out the gym and the appearance of the hero of the story. The reporter only smirked. "Well, if there are corroborations or victims, I can spin the whole thing." I made it clear that the information was about to leak out, and let Zach try to get out of it before the fame killed his business. Then I took steps to get the school where Miranda worked to start talking about her behavior. I did everything I could. Fake emails, social media innuendo. A couple of teachers were already whispering behind my back that Mrs. Rivers looks like she's in an unhappy marriage, and she's gone rogue. A vengeful rage drove me forward. I could see Miranda growing paler every day as she returned home. She complained that coworkers looked askew, that parents of students whispered. I didn't care. I burned with hatred, and I also chuckled painfully to myself. I hope she realizes who she's messing with. One evening the doorbell rang. I opened it, and there was Zach. His face was sullen, his eyes full of despair. "We need to talk," he said without even saying hello. "Yeah. Did you come to see how your future fatherhood is going? Or did you come to complain about your job problems?" I grinned, letting him inside. He walked into the living room, glanced at the pictures on the wall. Then he turned back to me. "I know you're the one spreading rumors. I've already had one photo shoot canceled. The fitness club owner hinted he didn't want a scandal surrounding his trainer. And I'm losing clients." "Wow, huh? That's awful." I fake-rounded my eyes. "But isn't that what you wanted? Break into someone else's family, take over my wife." He frowned. "She's not your property, Jason. She's a human being with feelings. Don't make it sound like it's some kind of thing." "Go to hell," I blurted out, clenching my fists. "You're just lucky I didn't snap your neck when I saw you in bed." He recoiled, but there was determination in his eyes. "If the child is really mine, I want to be a part of its life. I don't care about the gossip or the ruined career. I care about Miranda, much less the baby." My heart squeezed, and I felt rage throbbing in my temples. "Oh, so you've decided to become a father. Bravo. A heroic act. Is it okay that she has a husband who might also be the father of this child?" He sighed heavily. "Jason, understand, I don't want to fight you. But if you keep trying to ruin my life, I might start acting out too." At that moment, I felt like I was on the edge. My revenge was hitting its target, but it looked like he was going to hit back. Suddenly, Miranda appeared in the hallway. Her gaze darted from me to Zach, as if she expected a fight. I saw her instinctively put her hand on her stomach, as if protecting a child unbeknownst to her. That realization hit me the hardest. "Zach," she said quietly but firmly, "please leave. I don't want any fighting right now." He stood still for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I'm leaving. But Miranda, if there's anything you need, support, money, help." He stopped talking, looked at me. "I'll be right here." With those words, he walked out, slamming the door. Miranda sighed heavily, covered her eyes with her hand. "Why did he come?" she asked. "To find out why I was ruining his life. I seem to be doing that quite successfully," I replied grimly. She gave me a look that made my insides twitch. "Jason, this is getting dangerous. I know everyone at school is whispering. I could get fired. I mean, in small communities, a teacher's reputation is very important. How am I supposed to live with that?" I raised an eyebrow. "How am I supposed to live with you cheating on me? Have you thought about that?" She blushed, a lump rising in her throat. "It's my fault," she whispered, "but it still hurts me to see what we've become." I turned away. "My fault?" My head pounded. Words no longer had the power to calm me down. I cursed the day the idea of hiring a lover had crossed my mind. A few days later, I received a call from the school, but not directly, but through an acquaintance in human resources. I realized that Miranda was in danger of being out of a job if the rumors continued to grow. They were talking about inappropriate teacher behavior affecting the moral character of the school. That alone made my heart ache. After all, she was doing what she loved. That evening I found her in the kitchen. She was sitting there with several envelopes, sheets of paper, some receipts in front of her. "I'm in danger of being fired," she said without looking up. The parents of several students had complained that I was setting a bad example. I remained silent, feeling a prick of conscience. "Is that what you wanted?" she asked suddenly, glancing at me. "To lose my job?" I realized that something important was being decided. But the rage in me had not yet subsided. "Maybe I wanted to," I said. "I wanted you both to pay for your treacherous behavior." Miranda pressed her palm to her stomach, writhing, looking like she'd thrown up or had a stabbing pain. Looking at her anguished face, I felt guilty for a moment, but I kept silent. That night I went to sleep in my room, and she in the living room. In the middle of the night, I heard her sobbing and moaning as if in pain. I came out and saw her huddled on the couch, her face pale, sweat on her forehead. "What's the matter with you?" I was scared. "Stomach pulls," she whispered. "Maybe I don't know, sometimes in early pregnancy it happens." She didn't have time to finish. Suddenly she shook, and I realized that the situation was serious. She looked at me with a look of horror. I grabbed the car keys. "Let's go to the hospital, quick." We drove to the nearest emergency room. I was nervous, not knowing if I wanted this baby to be born. But seeing Miranda shaking and almost fainting, I knew that her health was the most important thing right now. The doctors did an exam and an ultrasound. I sat in the hallway, clutching the armrests of the chair with my hands. It was like an obsession. What if she loses the baby? What if she doesn't? Finally, she came out, pale but somewhat reassured. The doctor, an older woman, looked at me. "The baby seems to be fine, but she needs rest. Avoid stress." She looked sternly at Miranda and then at me. And I stood there, feeling everything inside me turn upside down. We got home in the morning. I was silent the whole way. She didn't say a word either. When we got in, I helped her undress, laid her on the couch. She looked up at me, shaking with fatigue and fear. "Thank you for not leaving me there," she whispered. I sat down next to her, feeling the emotions grow a lump in my throat. Anger, guilt, helplessness. It was all mixed together. "I don't want you to die, Miranda," I said hoarsely. "But this baby, I don't know what's going to happen to us." She closed her eyes. Tears rolled down from under her lashes. I wanted to touch her hand, but I couldn't. There was too great a gulf pulling us apart. A few days passed in tense silence. Miranda stayed home on sick leave. I went to work early and came back late. My revenge was still working. The rumors in the schools were still going around. Zach was losing clients, but I felt like it wasn't enough. One day, I went to a lawyer. I asked him to draw up the divorce papers. When he handed me the file, I felt something inside me snap. So this is it. I signed a few forms, not filing yet, just preparing the complete package. Grabbing the papers, I walked back to the house. Miranda was sitting on the couch, staring out the window. In her hands, her wedding ring, which she had removed, was twirling it between her fingers. When she heard me, she jumped up. "Jason." I thought. She saw the folder in my hands. Her face contorted. "Divorce?" I nodded, tossing the folder on the table. "I can't live with this delusion. You're pregnant, probably with someone else's child. I don't believe we can go back to the way things were." She clasped her hands together. "But Jason, can't you at least wait for the test results?" "And then what? Let's say it's my baby. Would I forgive you? Would I accept it like it never happened? I'm not sure. And if it's not mine, it's all over." She sobbed quietly. I looked at her with a sense of emptiness. I once thought I could never hurt her. Now I stood there with the divorce papers, almost triumphant at the sight of her despair. "Jason," she said suddenly, wiping away her tears, "how blind I've been. You'll never understand what it's like to feel unwanted. Yes, it's my fault, but you set this whole thing up." I felt another wave of anger, but I held it back. "I'm done. I'm tired. Pack your things, Miranda, while I'm being kind." She opened her mouth to object, but she saw the look in my eyes and shrank back, realizing I wasn't kidding. I went to my room, leaving her alone. For a few more days we lived under the same roof, barely speaking. I made it clear that our marriage was over. Miranda gathered clothes and study materials and cried quietly behind the closed door. With each sob, I felt a kind of prickly triumph. Let her know what it's like to be betrayed, but also a deafening pain. Finally, the day came when she left the room with her suitcase. I sat in the living room, staring at the floor. "I'm moving out tomorrow," she said calmly. "And then, we'll see how things work out with the baby." I nodded without looking at her. She went out. A week later we signed the divorce papers and mailed them to the court. There was no goodbye scene. She went to a friend's house who agreed to shelter her for a while. I expected to be relieved, but instead I felt only a deepening desolation. Everything seemed to have lost its meaning. The work was no fun. The house was silent and chaotic. But I didn't stop. I kept pressing Zach. I found out through a reporter that he had received a notice of dismissal from the fitness club. There were dirty discussions about his exploits on social media. I don't even remember how I got to the point of such meanness, but my resolve was unwavering. I will ruin his life like he ruined mine. Soon, Zach did indeed lose his job. I found out by accident. I ran into his former coworker who laughed. "Well, that catcher got what he deserved." I smiled, though I felt empty inside. Revenge was not satisfying. The school where Miranda worked had limited herself to a warning, but the social pressure was intense, and she decided to quit on her own until she found another place. I saw her a couple times when she stopped by to pick up the rest of her things. There were no tears in her gaze anymore, just quiet sadness and weariness. Her belly had rounded out a little, and she dressed more carefully, hiding it beneath roomy dresses. One day, when she came to get a box of textbooks, I had the courage to ask, "How are you doing anyway?" She shrugged. "It's been worse, but I'm hanging in there." We both realized that nothing was going to come back. "So the wind reaped the storm," the ancients said. I set up this test myself. Instead of a stronger marriage, we got a nightmare. Infidelity, pregnancy, divorce, broken destinies. Soon, the day came when the divorce became official. I received the envelope from the court, opened it, read the formal message, and felt something inside me die permanently. Later that day, I came across an old photo album. There were pictures of happy moments. The wedding, the first few months of our married life. Miranda is holding a bouquet of daisies in one of the photos. I'm hugging her. We're laughing. When I closed the album, my eyes watered. The next morning, I woke up in a house where I could no longer hear her voice, where our memories together had become ghosts. I looked in the mirror, my face gaunt, my eyes faded. Was this what I wanted when I started the test? No, but there was no turning back. So I ended this stage of my life, realizing that my cruel revenge had also turned out to be self-destruction. Yes, I had revenge on both of them. Zach lost his reputation and his job. Miranda lost her quiet life and her beloved schoolwork. I destroyed our family. I burned everything I could. I stepped out onto the porch, where the morning sun played in, and lit a cigarette, even though I don't usually smoke. The bitter smoke burned my throat as if it were mocking me. Somewhere deep inside I felt the way back was cut off, and ahead, emptiness. But maybe in that void there would be room for a new life without illusions. I swallowed my bitterness and put on my jacket. I pressed the car alarm button. The day was just beginning, And I finally understood clearly. The old Jason Rivers had died along with that marriage, and another man had been born, violent, devastated, and utterly alone. That's how my story ended. The end.